Welcome to the Hyperpolyglot Activist, Learn Languages, Make a Difference. My name is Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez, and today we're going to tackle a simple question. Do you need to move abroad to a country where your target language is primarily spoken for you to actually learn that language? And the answer is no, you definitely don't. Listen, being in another country is an amazing, eye-opening experience, and you will learn a lot of things, amongst which linguistic aspects. But believing that just by moving abroad, you're going to actually learn the language is premised on serious misunderstandings as to how language acquisition works. First, the assumption is passive. It seems to suggest that once you move to that country, by osmosis, you will absorb that language. However, this will likely not happen. Why? Because there is a thing we call comprehensible input. What does that mean? It means that for you to learn a language, you need to receive an input, you need to read or you need to hear language bits, part of which you understand. If you move to that country without knowing anything about the language, you will just feel overwhelmed and frustrated at the input that you receive because it's not comprehensible input. And in turn, you will not be able to reply, which will make the situation even more frustrating. So that's the first reason. It implies a passive stance. If you want to use your trips abroad or the fact that you're living abroad to learn a language, you need to have some kind of background in that language for part of the input that you will receive to be comprehensible, which is the only way you can build on top of that and to acquire that language. If you wish to learn more about comprehensible input, as well as about the difference between language learning and language acquisition, please click on the link on top of the screen. Now, the second reason is native speakerism. We have this romanticized, this idealized fantasy of native speakers living in a single country where the nation, the state, and the language entirely overlap and coincide. And so once we get ourselves into that bubble, we will acquire that language. This is premised on a faulty assumption, which is that so-called native speakers exist as an empirical reality, and they are the model to which to aspire in terms of language proficiency. Now, this is entirely false, as I have already demonstrated in the video whose link you can now see on top of the screen. And it means that once you move to that country, when you interact with locals, not natives, a number of scenarios are likely to unfold. First, that these people would like to speak to you in a language you already mastered, such as English or Spanish, particularly if they find hard to follow what you're saying. Second, even if you interact with these people in your target language, which presumably will be their first language, then people who speak a language as their first language, most of them do not have a C2 level, as I have already explained in the video whose link you can see on top of the screen. And third, the idea that by just moving to a country where your target language is primarily spoken, you will acquire that language is premised on a pre-internet mindset. What are you looking for when you actually move to a country where your target language is spoken? You're looking for immersion. But flash news, in the internet era, immersion does not longer require physical presence. You can actually learn languages online. If you don't know where to start or how exactly to go about this, I have created a video apropos this question that you can access by clicking on the link that you will now see on top of the screen. On top of this, we need to take into account that traveling, let alone living abroad, costs a pretty penny, a lot of money. And so in virtually every scenario, you will be better off saving that money and investing a fraction of it into learning the language online or in person, wherever you are located, without needing to relocate abroad. This is no excuse to be lazy or cheap about learning languages. If you really want to learn from the best, you will need to invest financially and time-wise. So look for instructors that are ideally accredited from a top university, because a PhD is not just a piece of paper. It is proof of rigorous and long training that implies lots of experience. Second, people with experience, ideally 10 plus years at all levels or at the level and age that you belong to, and instructors that are successful. You can check the ratings, the testimonials, perhaps word of mouth for that purpose. As you know, if you're looking for courses concerning Spanish and English, you can book them on my website, hyperpolyglotactivist.com. Now, a separate question is whether visiting the country where your target language is primarily spoken or living there can help you improve that language. Now, this is a more modest question. You no longer need to relocate to that country, but merely relocating that country might help you with your language learning goals. Now, is this the case? I would say in principle, yes, but with an important caveat. You still need to set aside time to study alone and to practice. Why? Because language learning is not just a matter of socializing. Socializing is just one aspect. If you don't combine socialization with study alone time, you will not be able to digest the input and the new information that you just acquired. You will be very likely to forget it or to limit your language practice to a very restricted set of items and topics. And to conclude, let me talk to you about my personal experience with English. So as part of my language learning journey, I took the C2 level of proficiency exam administered by Cambridge University when I was 18 or 19 years old. I passed it, and when I did so, I had lived in an English-speaking country for a total of perhaps 6 days or 1 week, thereby proving that you don't need to live in a country where your target language is primarily spoken for you to reach a C2 level of proficiency. Now, when I eventually moved to the UK to do my master's degree in philosophy in 2011, I found that my English level wasn't necessarily improving at the same rate it was improving when I was stuck in Spain and studying for the Cambridge exam. Now, why so? Because I came to realize that I wasn't setting time aside to practice. So I didn't have time to digest the input that I was receiving. And that's why I wasn't making progress. In fact, I was forgetting some of the grammatical structures and vocabulary that I had acquired back home when I was studying for this Cambridge exam. So again, showing that moving to a country where your target language is primarily spoken will not necessarily help you with your language learning journey, only if you also set aside time to practice and to study alone. So that's all from me. It's a myth. You don't need to move to a country where your target language is primarily spoken to learn that language. Doing so will not necessarily even help you. You have no excuses. Get to work, take full control of your language learning journey, and best of luck.